We are back with another episode of our series, the gut terms that everybody is using, but yet few people understand. So hopefully you've been keeping up with our series because it's been sparking lots of good discussion from you guys. Different DMs, different post comments. I love all of the different ways that this is getting your guys' wheels turning. And I've even had some individuals who are like, oh my gosh, this is so fitting because I just had a conversation with my PCP about this yesterday, or just had a conversation with my gastroenterologist about this yesterday. So I know that these terms are landing because let's be real, they're all over social media. So we've talked about leaky gut. We've talked about SIBO and how 70% of IBS diagnoses are actually more of an undiagnosed SIBO infection. And so today I really want to kind of build on this conversation with just one more, because I just hear about it so often in clinic and in practice, and I think it kind of stands in a little bit of a world of its own, and that is the gut term of Candida. Candida is a specific type of yeast. Yeast is a member of the fungal family, right? So when we think about the gut, a lot of times we think bacteria, and our microbiome is made of all sorts of living, breathing organisms, all the way from bacterial creatures, yes, but also viral, parasitic, and we also have this family of yeast and fungal overgrowths. So the most common one that gets the attention is usually Candida, and so sometimes we just use this term interchangeably to really talk about individuals that are struggling with yeast or fungal overgrowths. Now, we're going to be talking about some of the signs and the symptoms and some of the easiest ways to really recognize a yeast or a fungal overgrowth. But if you've spent like really any time in the wellness space at all, you've probably seen Candida kind of attached to a little bit of everything from brain fog to weight gain, skin rashes, fatigue, anxiety, even hormonal chaos as well too. And it becomes sometimes a little bit of like a catch-all explanation for why people feel more inflamed, more reactive, or even just kind of like stuck in their overall progress as well. And I totally understand why, because all of those things are 100% valid and 100% true. Don't get me wrong. But when you really kind of try to put everything on one culprit, sometimes that's a little bit short-sighted. And what I would say is the biggest common denominator is no one is really asking why Candida is having the environment to overgrow in the first place. Because a healthy human microbiome should have a great checks and balances on these things. And so I just think there's a little bit of a misunderstanding, number one, of what Candida is, how Candida forms. And also there's a really, really, really big mismatch right now in our current understanding of available Candida treatments. That is what I want to spend a majority of our time talking about today, because I see so many people come in, and don't get me wrong, Candida is real. Yeast and fungal overgrowths absolutely are real. They're not responsive to antibiotics because those are more for bacterial infections, right? This is a completely different organism, but we're kind of really throwing like a one size fits all diagnosis on this. And so in the conventional medicine setting, to me, Candida is going undiagnosed, untreated. Everybody that has like a yeast or fungal influence is getting put on antibiotics over and over and over again, which just exacerbates the environment in which Candida grows. So I see so many women that come in with recurring UTIs, bacterial infections, bladder infections, and things that are very fungal related, and they just keep getting put on antibiotics, which just makes the situation worse. Or you get like the functional medicine side of things that just sees Candida as something to kill. Ooh, I got to get in there and kill it. And it's like, no, this is something where we have to ask the bigger question of why. Why is this yeast or fungal overgrowth have a gut that it can grow and thrive to begin with? Because it shouldn't. So it's probably telling us a lot more about the gut than it truly does just about this guy of Candida or fungal overgrowth in the gut. So today I really want to make this conversation something that's very usable, very tangible, things that you guys can really say like, oh my gosh, that is me. Or I know someone in that exact situation who has been told that they have a Candida or a fungal overgrowth and all they did was put them on kill treatments and it came right back. And she spent thousands of of dollars in labs and supplements from this provider, or someone who is like very suspicious that they probably have more of a fungal or a yeast pattern and they just keep getting put on antibiotics or they just keep getting dismissed. So today, let's really talk about what this Candida and yeast and fungal family really is. What are the most common symptoms that should kind of clue you into whether this is you or not. And also, like I said, a little bit deeper into why both, in my mind, the conventional but also the functional approaches right now really are not doing people very much service, and what we want to be thinking about instead as we really wrap up to break it down into kind of the 3 to 4 main interventions that I find much more effective when someone is struggling with more of a Candida or yeast picture. So let's just dive into it, because I think it does help us kind of understand the real solutions for something when we have a little bit of science behind what we're talking about. So what is Candida? Candida is a type of yeast. Yeast is a type of fungus. These are all normal living, breathing organisms in the human body. You are not gross or disgusting if you have Candida and yeast in your system, because everybody has them. It's just a matter of at what level do we have them, and at what level are you going to be experiencing symptoms. So again, Candida is a type of yeast. Yeast is part of the fungal family. So sometimes you'll hear these terms used interchangeably. Yeast overgrowth, fungal overgrowth, Candida overgrowth. They're sometimes used interchangeably. So you can have yeast present in any of your mucosal membranes, meaning your mouth, your GI tract, your skin, your vaginal microbiome as well too. So under healthy conditions, yeast is going to coexist with bacteria as part of your normal microbiome. The goal is not a Candida-free body. It's not going to happen. It's not how humans work. But the better question should be, is yeast behaving like a well-mannered roommate situation, or is it like starting to take over the whole house, right? And its mess is just everywhere. Because when yeast becomes an issue, clinically speaking, the symptoms tend to show up in patterns all throughout the body. So, like I said, recurrent vaginal yeast infections, or even chronic itch, chronic irritation that flares with hormonal cycles, or flares with antibiotics, or flares with stress. So a lot of times when we're looking at the vaginal microbiome, we have to really think what are fungal patterns that might be associated here. Oral signs like white coating on the tongue, white thrush on the tongue, persistent mouth discomfort or mouth burning, especially, like I said, in and around stressful events or certain foods. It can definitely show up on the skin, is a very common place that it shows up. Persistent fungal rashes across the board, athlete's foot, fungal nails, as well as very itchy, dry skin and breakouts in your skin fold areas. So around the groin, under the boobs, in your armpits, really areas where you would have like skin fold assessments here. And then I would say also there's a whole class of acne that is very commonly associated with yeast overgrowths as well too. Digestive patterns. So individuals that have yeast overgrowth usually have a lot of bloating. They usually have a lot of food-based reactivity as well too, plus a history of things like chronic constipation, maybe even like long-term heartburn or GERD, blood sugar instability issues as well too, cravings. Cravings are a biggie. Feeling like you have a lot of sugar cravings, or even just feeling like how do I describe it? More than normal hunger or appetite cues, like you feel more hungry, more snacky than the average person, or you've noticed that your appetite is more than the average bear. So, can yeast be involved in brain fog and fatigue? Yes, sometimes it can. Typically, those symptoms make more sense when yeast is really just like one player in a bigger issue of looking at the gut terrain as a whole. So, that to me is kind of the part that's most commonly skipped here, is that yeast rarely is a problem in a very stable and healthy microbiome. It's just not. It's going to expand when the environment allows for its expansion in this regard. So functional and conventional medicine to me kind of just see yeast as something to kill. And that's why the relapse rate of yeast overgrowth is so common. And that's why, honestly, the treatment is very 50-50 on whether it's successful or not. Because if someone suspects more of a yeast or candida overgrowth, the treatment plan, to me, in my experience, has usually fallen into one of two buckets. Number one, conventional medicine is going to focus on like acute, obvious yeast patterns like vaginal yeast infections or oral thrush or sometimes fungal skin infections. And the solution is usually some sort of topical or oral antifungal medication like your nystatin, your itraconazoles of the world. They can be appropriate for an acute issue. They're pretty gnarly in terms of their side effects, especially on liver function and liver enzymes, but sometimes can be very helpful. But we can treat it topically, or we can kind of treat it as like a short-term kill treatment. But are we truly addressing why it occurred in the first place, which is going to tell us that it's not going to occur again? Or is this person just going to be back in your office every 3 months for this same overgrowth issue? Now, functional medicine sometimes, like I said, does a little bit better, but in my experience, a lot of individuals that have worked with even other functional medicine practitioners have really fallen short in this regard because they take a similar approach in that they assume that yeast is driving like a broad diversity of symptoms. Yes, that is probably very, very possible. They might run some pretty spendy testing. They're going to run stool testing. They might run organic acid testing, and they're going to build a protocol to like kill the yeast, right? And this is really where people start to get trapped in it because the strategy to just kill the yeast usually becomes antifungals, either pharmaceutical antifungals or herbal antifungals, and then they're going to use things like binders, or they're going to use a highly stressful like anti-yeast diet, low candida diet. You can't have fruit, you can't have carbs, you can't have fermented foods, you can't have dairy, you can't have gluten, you basically can't have joy, right? Like they think they're going to somehow starve off candida. That's not how it works, right? Initially, some people on this, they do feel better. And that's where it's like, it lulls us into a little bit of a false sense of reality, because when you sharply restrict like carbohydrates and some of those fermentable fibers, you are reducing the fuel for the microbiome, right? We talked about this last week when we talked about the SIBO episode and why some people initially feel better on a low FODMAP diet. Cool. You just removed the food for that particular organism. So you're not going to get the fermentation and you're not going to get the gas symptoms, but you're not going to starve off a yeast overgrowth. Like the symptom relief temporarily can happen, yes, but the internal terrain that caused yeast to grow in the first place is really unchanged, right? Yeast is just like, again, behaving in a manner that it tells it to at that like ultra controlled diet. And then the second that you try to eat anything in a semblance of a carbohydrate, again, you're going to have all of those same symptoms, right? And so this is why relapse is so common, because you didn't really actually change the terrain. You just like gave it a quick temporary Band-Aid and then walked away from it and wondered why that person was back in your office for the exact same issues no more than 6 to 12 weeks later, right? To me, that's not healthcare. That's not medicine. That is not root cause anything. That's just, like I said, introducing a new problem, because if you put someone on a very restrictive, like low carb diet, they're getting less fiber, which is less microbial diversity for the long term, less carbohydrates. So they're going to have more blood sugar dysregulation, more cortisol issues. They're going to feel more restricted, which puts them into more stress physiology. The stress physiology is going to weaken their immune system. Like, how is someone going to get out of this loop, right? You're really just putting them in this loop of they feel bad, they go strict, they temporarily feel better, they try to reintroduce the foods, the symptoms flare again, and then they go strict again. Like, what are we doing, right? I mean, we're not really getting the bigger picture. So this is where, in my holistic medicine methods, what I've developed and what I train other practitioners on too, and what I apply in clinic and practice for individuals that come to me with these very, very real symptoms. I'm like, yep, I would agree. I think what we're dealing with here is very much candida driven. It's fungal driven. There is some sort of influence of yeast here, but I don't know that I 100% feel like we just try to repeat the same old tricks and not expect the same results, right? We're going to get the same results. So this is where we have to ask the better question of not just what do we need to kill the yeast? I ask the question of why did the yeast have an opportunity to expand in the first place? Because there's going to be certain internal conditions that are going to make this happen. And if you don't understand that and you don't rectify that, then you're going to get stuck in the same stupid cycle over and over again. So here are a few of the biggest things that I see clinically that move the needle more when we start to understand the terrain as a whole. Number one reason why people get stuck in this loop, blood sugar instability. So a lot of individuals, especially conventional medicine, they're not talking about blood sugar stability in a Candida treatment. They're almost making the blood sugar worse because they're pulling out all carbohydrates and all fiber from the diet, and they're putting you on very strong antifungals. So either of those not going to be conducive to stable blood sugars. You're probably going to feel like garbage in certain situations. But the reason why you have a Candida overgrowth in the first place is probably because there's some blood sugar issues happening first and foremost. So chronically high glucose, or if there's an insulin resistance pattern, that's going to change immune signaling. That is going to change the pH of the gut and is going to cause that Candida to have a perfect environment to kind of grow and thrive. So it's less about like, oh, you ate sugar, and more about how your metabolism is handling sugar as a whole, and looking at things like stress hormones as well as sleep, protein intake, meal timing, circadian rhythm. Like we have to focus on these things just as much as like kill the yeast, or it's just going to come right back. Number two is even if there's not blood sugar instability, sometimes there can be some immune signaling issues here. There is a marker that we look at. It's called secretory IgA. It is a measurement of your overall immune system function, and it tells us how healthy your overall mucosal barriers are in all of your mucosal membranes throughout your body. So a lot of times the secretory IgA in your immune system is a very big regulator of keeping yeast quiet, keeping it in its like assigned seat, so to speak, right? But if we have, like I said, chronic stress, blood sugar, under fueling, over exercising, low protein intake, nutrient deficiencies or nutrient depletions, that all can lower overall secretory IgA levels in the body. And now yeast has a perfect opportunity to expand, right? So we have to address blood sugar. We have to address the immune system. Number three, and probably most commonly overlooked, is sluggish digestion and bile dynamics. No one, I don't understand why. No one is talking about this, right? Stomach acid and bile are your natural antimicrobials. So if you have low acid or you have bile stagnation, your digestion is going to weaken, and therefore your overall microbial balance is going to shift. And so yeast has a much better opportunity to grow and thrive if you don't have great digestive function from the top down. So we have to be looking at these types of things, like what is contributing to low stomach acid, what's contributing to poor bile dynamics, or this is just going to repeat all over again. And then fourth, most common one is that I see kind of overlooked in the overall thought process around yeast is stress and cortisol. So I know I've been mentioning kind of stress and cortisol, but this is really a big one because high cortisol in the system changes your blood sugar. Right? When we change our blood sugar, then we suppress our immune function, we reduce our stomach acid, and it slows our motility. And then all of a sudden we're going to have an altered microbiome and a place where yeast can really grow and thrive in the first place. So if your nervous system is constantly in a state of fight or flight, you can throw antifungals at your body all day long, and it's just going to keep recreating the same exact terrain. So this is just what I mean by like, am I against like conventional interventions? No, but I just think it's such a short-sighted approach and usually is not a long-term solution on its own. We have to be thinking about blood sugar instability, immune system signaling, stomach acid and bile dynamics, stress and nervous system regulation, because the question that I'm asking is not how do I kill yeast? It's more what systems are making yeast growth more likely in the first place, and what do we have to do to stabilize that so that the ecosystem can regulate itself again? Like I'm looking at changing the entire terrain. So that means that we're looking at digestive support, bile and liver dynamics. We're looking at your motility and constipation patterns, your blood sugar. So not only like what you're eating, but when you're eating, how you're pairing foods together, nervous system, nutrient repletion. Like, this is the difference between when you're getting healthcare that is just gartered around symptom suppression versus long-term stability of this picture. So if you feel like any of these kind of like yeast or candida type patterns are very reminiscent of things that you've been dealing with and haven't found answers, absolutely, you deserve the testing to find those answers. Absolutely, number one. And then you also deserve a more thoughtful process on how to actually reverse the terrain versus just putting another Band-Aid on top of it, whether that's pharmaceutical or supplemental. Like, a Band-Aid is a Band-Aid in those same respects as well too. So if this is something that you feel like you've been dealing with, or you feel like you have a family member or a friend that would benefit from this conversation, absolutely send it to them. The first step in working together and really getting to the bottom of this is to schedule a functional wellness consult together. You can click the link in my bio at any time. That will take you directly to the booking page there, where you can claim us a day and time where we can run some labs and really start to have a better conversation and a full picture approach for reversing this overall gut terrain. So hopefully that was helpful for you guys. Stay tuned for more coming next week.